My name is Sandra S. and I'm up. And coming up tonight, Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank maintains policy rate at 14.5%. Meanwhile, Ghana's debt stock for the first quarter goes up significantly to hit 236 billion cedis. We hear from the experts. Also in the bulletin tonight, Association of Savings and Loans Companies welcome Bank of Ghana's liquidity support. We have the details coming up shortly after the break. So our big story tonight, the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of Ghana has kept the policy rate unchanged at 14.5%. Governor of the Bank of Ghana, Dr. Ernest Addison, attributed the decision to some risk to the country's inflation outlook.
To respond that all the measures that we put into place in the interest of depositors, as well as in the longer term, the interest of the investors themselves, because you also what happens when banks are undercapitalized and have liquidity issues is the depositors who fail to get access to their deposits in the banks. So we are trying to be risk averse and in a sense to protect depositors so that the banks will be careful about how they dissipate, earnings. And all that we are saying is that we can see the evolution of, weaker economic conditions, which means in the outlook one can expect that credit impairments would go up. One can expect that the banks will face a more challenging environment, and all of that will translate into non-performing loans. And therefore, it's important that we conserve the liquidity and the capital that the banks have at this time. So if you think about it, in the long run, it's in the interest of the shareholders themselves that the institutions will be stronger even after the end of this pandemic. We are going through this problem at a time that we have just completed a reform of the banking sector. We have strengthened their capital positions. And therefore, the banks are in a much stronger position to manage the developments that have taken place. Nevertheless, we are beginning to see emerging signs of weakness. Profits are going down, their operational costs are going up, the net interest income for banks are beginning to decline. So these are all warning signs in terms of the outlook. But overall, we think that they have the buffers. They have the capital buffers and they have the liquidity buffers to handle this pandemic. Obviously, if things turn out to be much worse than currently projected, you would have a weaker banking sector. But for now, the current projections do not suggest that things would revert back to where we started. This is
So the governor also gave a projection of the economy during these difficult times.
I think the economy, the buffers of the Ghanaian economy, and the growth projections, because this is really the work that has been done internally from the Bank of Ghana, looking at the developments, and on the basis of the projections that have been done from the World Economic Outlook. If you look at the projections for global growth, you are looking at a 3% decline in global growth. Just looking at the statistical relationship between the growth of the Ghanaian economy and global growth, we have been able to draw some, inferences. And one of those inferences is what we are telling you, that we think the Ghanaian economy will grow between 2% and 2.5%. Now, these things are still developing. if things get worse than they currently are, these projections will change. So it's a situation which is still evolving. But for now, these are the projections that our technical people were able to put together. And then you asked the question about whether the banks were implementing the policy measures that were announced in the last MPC. To the best of our knowledge, they are. And we have been meeting with the chief executives of the banks. The last time we met was on a week today. They gave us updates on where they are.
Meanwhile, the country's total debt stock has gone up significantly to hit 236 billion cedis for the first quarter of 2020. This was captured in the latest summary of economic and financial data released by the central bank.
According to the data, in just about 3 months, the total debt stock increased by 18 billion Ghana cedis since December 2019 to hit 236 billion Ghana cedis. However, tracking the debt position from March 2019 to March 2020, the total debt stock increased by 36.1 billion Ghana cedis. Joy businesses learned that this might not necessarily be as a result of fresh borrowing, but can be linked to the city's marginal depreciation during that period and some additional spending to help deal with the financial sector cleanup. The 236 billion Ghana cedis should translate to about 59.3% of the total value of the economy. Now, based on this debt, every Ghanaian should owe about 7,870 Ghana cedis if the debt is shared among a population size of 30 million. Some analysts have even argued that Ghanaians could be paying more in the form of taxes to help settle these debts. When it comes to the country's international reserves, the data put it at $10.2 billion, representing 4.8 months of import cover, slightly higher than our position with the same period last year. In the banking sector, there was a lot to smile about as loans that banks fear would go bad was improving. Deposits was picking up strongly, while loan advances was going up substantially.
All right, so we want to say more on this development and have been joined via Zoom by economist Professor Godfred Walking for more on this. Thank you so much for your time this evening, Prof.
Thank you very much. Good evening to our cherished viewers, and thank you for having me on your show.
Right. So the risk to inflation outlook is one of the major reasons for holding the rates unchanged. And so, but one would say that earlier this month of April, we had the inflation rate going up to 10.6%, the highest in 8 months. So what do you say to critics who say that the rate should have come down considering the fact that inflation is high?
Well, I think that the threat of inflation is something that cannot be ignored at this stage. And therefore, I think the Bank of Ghana keeping the rate at 14.5% is the optimal thing to do now. And I agree with the governor because things are still evolving. And therefore, you do want to ease or decelerate your policy rate and lose the policy room to be able to contain the threat of inflation when it actually crystallizes. And therefore, I think the strategy is let's wait a little bit and see. But it's also important to also wait and see what earlier measures they put in place, what effect they are having in the market, and then see the response from the physical side as well. And therefore, I think at this stage, the optimal thing to do is to keep the rate, and I agree with them, is the way to go.
Right. There were some interventions also that were announced by the Bank of Ghana for the banking sector. We'll shortly come to that. But first of all, let's deal with the debt stock, Ghana's debt stock. It has also gone up significantly for the first quarter to hit 236 billion cedis. What does this mean for the economy?
Well, I think that is expected. It's expected also because I think we did a little bit of front loading with our borrowing. So in terms of the fiscal deficit in the 2020 budget, government, especially the Ministry of Finance, decided to front load to some extent. So we did the Eurobond in the second month of the year. And let me say that we were lucky because it wasn't long after that the market has been shut. So if you look at the effect of that $3 billion, if you look at the CD equivalent, that is quite a lot. Of course, there have been some other borrowings from the domestic market, and therefore that is to be expected. And then again, the spending to contain the pandemic, and then the effect of the pandemic on the government revenue envelope are such that the government certainly will have to do a little bit more borrowing in order to make up for the shortfall. So that is expected, and I believe that because these are extraordinary times, that requires extraordinary measures. If you look at all the fiscal stimulus that government has done, essentially the debt at the end of the day, because the revenue envelope remains dwarfed and the expenditure has gone up, so the difference has to be financed through debt.
Okay, Prof, let's go back to the banking sector. Indeed, difficult times for the banking sector, but the BOG has actually instituted a lot of measures to be able to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on the sector. And let me just take you through some of the measures that have been instituted. They have extended recapitalization deadline for microfinance institutions and rural banks. And then also BOG has purchased government bond with 14.5% rate for 10 years period with a moratorium for 2 years. And then also some other interventions were announced today. Are these laudable ideas in these difficult times? Or we can say that, like Oliver Twist, will certainly be asking for more to mitigate the impact on the sector?
Certainly from the fiscal side, and then also from the private sector side, and maybe ordinary Ghanaians, it wouldn't be out of proportion to ask for more. And that will not be unique to only Ghana, because all over the world, even with well-endowed economies, we are asking for more. And even though more has been done, it's still not considered enough. And therefore, but it's always easier from the monetary side to respond, because the usual politics that characterize fiscal response is absent when it comes to the monetary side. So if you look at it, Bank of Ghana was one of the first institutions in Sub-Saharan Africa to respond appropriately to COVID-19. If you look at within Sub-Saharan Africa. So they have been at the forefront. And then again, if you look at the measures that they have also done, they are typically within their framework. And I think to the extent that, and it reflects their understanding of the development. And therefore, they have been a bit proactive in terms of cushioning the sector and also complementing fiscal policy. Because we are in a time where the two main policies need to complement each other. The fiscal side from Ministry of Finance and then government must be complemented by the monetary side, and that is what we are seeing. Without that, it would have been a bit more difficult for economy by now. So I think that I believe that it's still evolving. So it may be necessary going forward for Bank of Ghana to do a little bit more support, maybe direct support to government in terms of monetizing some of the deficit than maybe, because the international capital market is on hold, practically, and therefore we have to look a bit more within. But of course, bilateral arrangements and then some kind of debt relief that African finance ministers are discussing are all noteworthy. The challenge for us right now is that we don't have the fiscal space to even finance the economic recovery the way we would have loved. But I believe that from the understanding I gather from Bank of Ghana, they are more than ready to do that which is within their limit to complement the fiscal policy to ensure that Ghana's recovery process is a bit more maybe smoother or faster than we thought. But let's not deceive ourselves. We are in for the long haul. The road ahead of us is not that user friendly. Let me put it that way. The recovery process is going to be a bit challenging, because every country is looking inward. It's not like this is something that is only affecting Ghana, and you can expect a greater hand of fellowship from other countries. They are all trying to rebuild their economies. And what matters now is that we have to be prudent with how we spend our limited resources and make sure that we put them to the maximum alternative uses. And then minimize integrity violations, minimize corruption, pursue greater efficiency in whatever that we do. That way, we'll be able to come out of it a bit more stronger than if we kept to the usual way of doing things.
Great perspective, but there are also calls on government to print money at these tough times because, I mean, the economy is actually suffering. But I mentioned earlier that BOG had purchased government bond with a 14.5% rate for 10 years. Does that actually mean that this money is going to go into the printing of money? And what do you say to calls for money to be printed for the economy at this crucial time?
I think that there's conventional wisdom in monetizing the deficit rather than the usual debt financing that we have been doing. Because when you do the monetizing, you hold back your debt stock. And then also the interest commitment also remains low.
Right.
But there's a threat to that if it's not done appropriately. There are certain conditions that must be met to ensure that monetization of the deficit does not encourage price development unnecessarily. And all these things must be done. And I believe that those at Bank of Ghana and Ministry of Finance, they understand all these dynamics very well, and therefore they will choose the appropriate instrument within the right framework and within the right conditions to ensure that we are able to minimize the price development effect. Prof,
what do you think is appropriate framework? What do you think is appropriate thing to do? Should we print money?
I think that we have to find a fine balance. We cannot say no where we are heading towards. We cannot say no. A certain level of monetization of the deficit will certainly be appropriate within certain right conditions, particularly in terms of value for money and where those monies will go to. Once they go to the productive sectors of the economy and we see greater efficiency, then the idea is that the threat of inflation that is usually highlighted in measures like that may not be that much strong, because the productive sectors would have been enhanced in terms of the cash flow generation capacity of the productive sectors of the economy. That would be very helpful. But if you look at the jump in inflation for April, it certainly tells us that there's a lot more that we have to do to improve the local value chain or supply chain to make sure that we are able to link the farmlands to the market centers within the shortest possible time to minimize, because in economics, prices are upwardly flexible and downwardly sticky. So people react to inflation expectations, okay, and that is also playing out there. So there's some level of management of the macro economy that we must put within the right perspective, and our expectations as well, so that it doesn't fuel price development unnecessarily.
Well said. I want to say a big thank you this evening. Professor Godfred Poppin is an economist, and we've been discussing the policy rate that has been kept at 14.5%. Now, the Association of Savings and Loans Companies has been reacting to the measures instituted by the Central Bank. Executive Secretary of the Association, Aboagye-Wiafe, told Joy Business the emergency liquidity support will cushion them in these difficult times.
It reinforces the fact that the client is the center of this whole thing, so that the client will continue to have access to financial services from their preferred savings and loans company, and also to give the confidence to the client that the regulator will continuously monitor the space. You saw that the regulator said the various companies should continue to treat their clients fairly, especially those who come for restructuring of their loans, those who request for extension. We want to encourage the savings and loans companies and all banking institutions that let us take advantage of the policy directions issued by the central bank. And also, those who qualify and are interested in the liquidity support, they should take advantage of it to continuously boost their liquidity.
Are your members really interested in this? Because I knew that you had earlier told us that you had made a request for liquidity support.
The savings and loans companies were actually looking for these things, and now that it has come, those who are interested and who expressed interest and also qualify, they are ready to take advantage of it.
The fact is that it doesn't come free, and so what do you make of that one? And do you think that will limit your members who want to take advantage of this?
The bottom line is that there's nothing free. And so if they say they are giving it at a rate which is very moderate, example, if you look at the release, the monetary policy release from the central bank said that they are even granting or advancing more support to the government at the policy rate 14.5. If the central bank give this rate to financial institutions at 14.5, I think that it will go a long way. And it will even influence the interest rate in the market. These are some of the measures that we're looking for. Unfortunately, the central bank has taken these decisions.
In other news tonight, oil marketing company Petrosol has donated personal protective equipment and other assorted products worth 30,000 cedis to the Upper West Regional Hospital. JoyNews' Upper West correspondent Wafek Salam has more from Wa.
The donation made by oil marketing company Petrosol to the Upper West Regional Hospital is a sequel to similar donations that were done in Accra and other places as part of the company's contribution to the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. The company is distributing personal protective equipment and assorted products to about 10 health facilities across the country worth 100,000 Ghana cedis. According to Petrosol, it's to assist medical institutions with the needed medical resources to enable them to treat patients infected with the disease and also protect themselves against the deadly disease. Northern Territory Manager of Petrosol, Balagunyentimi Desmond, donated the items worth 30,000 Ghana cedis to the Upper West Regional Hospital.
And as part of our corporate social responsibility, we support in the healthcare and the safety of both our medical people and our customers, whom these health directors and health personnel will be taking care of. So, following up from the presentation that was made at our national office in Accra, we have brought the Upper West consignment, and in association with our dealers, we are adding 80 cartons of bottled water. We have brought in a box and half of these hand gloves. We also brought in 10 pieces of disposable nose masks and 10 gallons of alcohol for use. We also have with us 2 gallons of hand sanitizer and 80 pieces of the N24 nose mask.
Acting Upper West Region's Director of Health Services, Dr. Damien Pugwiri, who received the items before handing over to the medical superintendent of the Upper West Regional Hospital, Dr. Robert Amesia, thanked Petrosol for the donation and urged other organizations and individuals to come to the aid of the region to enable it fight the pandemic.
And before we go, we wish to apologize to our cherished audience in the UK for their inability to access us through the TuneIn app as usual. We are available on www.myjoyonline.com and www.adomonline.com. You can also access our streams on Facebook, Android devices, Google Play Store and Apple App Store as My Joy Online and Adom Online. That'll be all for the program this evening. You can log on to myjoyonline.com for more news updates, but I'm back at 7 p.m. on the Joy News Prime with more business news updates. My name is Tanidra Esina Mapene. Thanks so much for watching.